Well, thank you all, again for coming to ClueCon and for being here and for being at this panel. I think that, we can say sort of across all these industries that we're at a very transformative time when it comes to machine learning and artificial intelligence and its application to so many different industries. And we are fortunate to have with us today on stage people who have a lot of deep experience in this area, both from a thought leadership standpoint, a legislative standpoint, an implementation standpoint, and everything in between. So I think that we're in for a good conversation about kind of all different parts about this. People who have been working in this technology for a long time have lots of different opinions on it, lots of different insight into it. So thank you all for being up here as well. And I thought we would just kind of take a minute and go down the line. And you guys can introduce yourselves to everyone so people know who you are, and then we'll just jump right in. Take it away, Eli.
Sounds good. Thank you. My name is Eli Yelluas. I'm the chief architect at Replicant. I've been working on AI for a while now. It's been about 6 years or so. We do voice AI, specifically on the phone. If you call AAA for a tow truck, you're talking to our system.
Hi, Gosmar. I'm Chief Innovation Evangelist at Tagg. We do AI-driven customer care solution, omnichannel AI-based. We've been working on voice bot and conversational AI solutions since at least, I would say 4 to 6, 7 years right now. Yeah.
I've got my own. Yeah, so I'm James Tagg. I build mobile networks. I'm currently chief architect for World Mobile. But in between the last network I built and this network I built, I actually worked for the Penrose Institute. And you may know that Roger Penrose has a different view on whether computers and the human brain are the same. And in COVID, because I couldn't do anything, I actually built a type of quantum computer in my garage, which attempts to mimic some of the ways in which a human brain might work.
I'm Anthony. I've been binging AI for about 7 months now, building it into our systems and building a voice product that you might have heard about a couple times throughout the conference and still will if you go to Dangerous Demos.
I'm Kristian Kielhofner. I've been using Astro since 2004, FreeSwitch shortly after there. Roughly 10 years of experience in what we used to call ML, primarily vision applications. Within probably the last, am I in and out? Hello? Within the last year or so, just really accelerated interest in ML and AI generally.
I'm Jeff. I'm a consumer of AI, have been for a long time, and I'm a little both scared and excited about where we're about to go.
Great. Well, we'll dive into that a little bit. Yeah, and so I think a lot of them undersold their credentials. Some of these people have been working in this industry for long enough and done amazing work, really pushing things forward in a lot of different ways. So that's sort of where I guess I wanted to start was from everyone here's experience using particularly AI and ML over the past 5, 10 years, or even the past year. How have you seen the changes of it, both from a ease of technical implementation all the way through actual use cases in telecom? And how do let's dig into that for a sec.
Sure. So when we first got started with this idea in 2017, a huge paper came out that kind of changed everything. It was the Transformers paper from Google. And that really made a lot of the AI stuff we do now possible. Before that, AI was kind of just automation, and the ML approaches that were around for conversational AI were okay. You can do some NLP, you can understand something of what a caller might want, but it really wasn't as powerful as it is today. And with the Transformers paper, that really opened the door, and BERT and these other models really opened the door for what we're seeing now. So it's gotten a lot easier to deploy. It's gotten a lot easier to implement. And that was initially, that was just six years ago. After that, we've got now the generative AI field. Initially, when GPT first was out, GPT-1 was kind of funny and it wasn't very good. GPT-2 was a little bit better, but it still was able to generate things that were somewhat humorous. They just weren't particularly human-like. But GPT-3 came out, and that really changed everything. And now generative AI is in the news. It's all over. We keep hearing about it. We keep seeing it. and it's really changed how everyone thinks about it. But it's also raised the bar. So now the expectation from the general public, they've seen ChatGPT, they've seen what this can do, they're expecting a lot. So systems that use AI, the bar has been raised substantially.
Yeah, as I mentioned before in my presentation, we are moving from, let me say, proof of concept experimental projects to actual projects right now in the field. And I would also say that we are moving from narrow AI, so AI used, for example, in customer service, conversational AI, just for specific operations. Right now, we are moving to use also what it's called the generalized AI, so all the generative AI hype on one end, but also some real now. And yeah, we are starting to play with that as well. That's also a huge next step and game changer right now.
Have you found with the change from like specific AI to sort of more generalized AI, have you seen that improve the quality? What are the actual improvements from a more domain-specific version to a more generalized version?
Well, apart from the quality, what I see is that you can actually design and program that in a totally different way. Okay, so I was showing you an example before by using, for example, the SignalWire new virtual agent. You can do that without being so technical inside that. You don't need a machine learning specific engineer to do that. Of course, you need that if you want to look underground what's going on, but you can actually do that without being so much technical. You can focus more on the high level design of the conversation to do that. That's, I think, the main change. Then, of course, there is the quality, there is the accuracy, which is, by the way, very much important for the industry, because at the end of the day, if you don't have accuracy, I am talking about the customer service, you will provide a bad service, but that's another story. The first is the capability to do the design and the configuration so easily.
Well, I mean, stating the obvious, it got very good all of a sudden, right? It used to be rubbish, and now it's good. And it's moving its way right way through the stack. So what I mean by that is it can do voice and it can do video. You know that I try and clone James Bodie every year. It's a little kind of project for dangerous demos. And you can now see, not this year, but maybe in a couple of years' time, being able to clone him so it's indistinguishable between James, the digital clone, and James, the actual James.
We all want James to live with us forever. Absolutely. Understood.
So I just went on blissfully unaware and thinking AI was the bad guys in Call of Duty until I felt like it was useful. And then one day it sounded more useful. And especially when it was accessible over a stream of text. And as I said earlier, I'm a child of Unix. Unix is a unique kind of computer environment where you use literary skills and computer skills together because everything's typed and written. You're just communicating with the computer as a text stream. So when I realized there's like a text stream from outer space that just lets me do whatever I want, I fed that into the rest of my infrastructure and I was happy. So, there's a lot of cool science going on in this kind of thing, and I felt like, well, I've done a lot of that low-level nitty-gritty stuff when it came to telephony, and AI seems like a good place to try being a consumer and take it forward and make it so people can use it rather than trying to necessarily contribute to the direct science of it, which sounds fun, but again, too old for this shit. So. Well,
I have a question. So, Tony, you spent the last bunch of time just deep diving into actually getting this working in an easier way, and you have decades of experience doing the same in telecom with putting FreeSwitch out there so people could actually access more difficult systems in an easy way. What have you seen in your creation of this for SignalWire that you were surprised by, or that you managed to make easier, or things you've noticed that were difficult people should be aware of? Is there anything specifically you've run into?
There's two main things. One is kind of coalescing everything into something usable, because it's kind of, just a random API. There's not a lot. A lot of the AI systems do not have a super complex API. They're very easy, which is actually cool because everyone can figure out how to make something out of it. You can build your own little command line AI tool, and as long as you know Bash, even. But then, like, giving it the ability to interact with people when you can't type is one of the harder things, and we've been working on building some of that stuff forever. It's almost like the one missing piece because we've solved, the latency, the turnaround time of collecting speech, being able to interrupt and having like something talk and listen at the same time, and all those things were there, but there's like no kind of soul for it. So like, even though the AI is fake, it still kind of gives an imaginary soul to this kind of TTS environment that we've had already. So it was very fun to try it. It's like little,
that's what people resonate with, right?
The Pinocchio pixie dust on the little robot that we were trying to work
and
on.
They resonate with that soul. That's what everyone responds to, is that sort of soul of the machine. You really feel like there's someone on the far end. Cool.
Yeah, I think, Eli, you probably said it best in kind of the differentiation in terms of eras with the Transformers mention is all you need. And it's fairly unusual, pretty much in any space, that you would see the same fundamental sort of underlying implementation approach architecture being essentially used universally throughout the space here, even a half a decade later, which is extremely impressive. And then, I think there's kind of another era that goes along with that, and that is the clear distinction between, kind of what I had referenced before with, ML 10 years ago for vision applications. In terms of object detection, intent classification, NLP for text, et cetera. And then to Tony's point about the soul, generative AI, the ability for these models sort of reusing or kind of re-implementing some of these same fundamental underlying techniques to actually generate content that is more or less new and unique, depending on kind of the sprinkling of that soul and the given implementation. I think this is one of these things where I'm not necessarily the best at analogies, but it's probably akin to vacuum tube to transistor, or horse and buggy to automobile. It's something along those lines.
I mean, it's very transformative. Back, I think it was in 2002, we integrated Tell Me into Free World Dial-Up. And that was way before Alexa, way before other smart chats. And it was sort of a foreshadowing of interactive voice, how it can go. And I was kind of mesmerized by that. It was in 1996, there was a research paper done at Oxford where a grad student first looked at phonemes and broke down phonemes. And the demonstration for his PhD was getting Caruso to sing an opera he never sang. And that's what first got me into phonemes and generative AI, generative voice back then. And I think it was 2016, I was doing a conference series called Monage, rhymed with Vonage, but it was all about messaging on the net. And I looked at the rise of chatbots. And in fact, I was so worried that the government would come after the AI world that I created a trade association called FCC.ai. And no one paid attention to it. And I got people who were writing code, some computer scientists to care, and I had some of the very original chatbot folks all at the conference. But no one else cared. And no surprise to me that the governments around the world are reacting the way they do, because again, AI became a term, most popular, misunderstood term in human history. And I think depending upon how we color it is going to change how we get to use it, and that people will be quick to react, not quick to let go. And right now, I think some of the applications we ultimately can deliver is going to be restricted by how people are abusing it and how much abusive it is, how it's perceived, as opposed to the reality. But I believe in good AI. I believe that in human history, AI can help us save lives and do so much goodness and bring soul back to so many things. Because at the end of the day, no matter where we go, I'm a firm believer that voice will always be the killer app. There's so much metadata. When you tell someone I love you, I'm safe, everything is okay, particularly in times of trauma, that's magical. And to be able to, like when my mom passed away a couple of years ago, my sisters and I, we've saved all the voicemail from my mom. Those are her messages, right? We can't replace it yet, but being able to have that information and the relationship we have with that. So we want to trust our AI to be kind to us. but it will also be protected if it's cruel to us.
And how do you feel, that was something I wanted to chat about a little bit later, but open it up to whoever wants to talk, the regulation aspect that's out there right now, right? This is being talked about very heavily at the congressional level. Large companies are pushing it. You're starting to see, Meta, all these guys saying it needs to be regulated, or OpenAI, but at the same time releasing, models like Llama and things that are extremely, very, very capable. And the Pandora's box appears to be open in a lot of ways. So what do you think might be an avenue forward, or how do you see this evolving?
I'll just jump in and say now is not a time to be passive.
Yeah.
I mean, I have my own experience petitioning for something that changed the way the world communicates back in 2003, and I'll tell you that everyone's voice matters. Mm-hmm. If you think that this is something that only large corporations with $100 billion market caps and up should participate in, you're wrong. What Washington, D.C. wants to hear is from the every person. If you have a strong position in where things are going, share your voice. Don't hold back, because otherwise, I told you so. Mm-hmm. Because the lobbyists that are working with the large corporations are working for their interests only. There's no such thing as a kind, good company, usually. Sometimes there are, but usually it's for their own bottom line. And if you want to preserve a part of that future to do great things, now is the time to come forward and think about that and share it. Not to be quiet, because if you're quiet, you will be shut down. Mm-hmm.
I think the point about the little guy is really interesting. I was thinking through one of the kind of more interesting initial kind of early LLM projects that I did was totally for fun. This never left my local environment, but essentially took Llama that I was able to obtain, the original one, this goes to show just how quickly the ground shifts. So it was the original shady Llama with no commercial use whatsoever. Not that this was commercial. I got a Reddit comment data set and fine-tuned this thing, and it was demented. I mean, it would come up with insults that just cut you to the core. And this was, essentially like some basic, how-tos, some Python and a $1,000 GPU. Mm-hmm. And took 4.5 hours to train, something like that. So it just goes to show the kind of readily available access. And, I certainly wouldn't want to turn this thing loose on the internet somewhere, because it was just absolutely brutal. Mm-hmm.
Is there an education aspect to it that we need to get out there to teach people to, this was sort of came up in the 90s with Photoshop, right? Where you no longer could trust what you were seeing in images. And I think we kind of, as a society, sort of got over that. We realized that images might be altered always, particularly, things around beauty or things like that do have long-lasting repercussions. Do you think it's an education aspect for society in general? Is there, that's a hard thing to legislate, but, any thoughts on that?
I happen to have friends of mine who work for the Board of Education, and there is a very strong line of people pro and against ChatGPT specifically. The hallucinations are wonderful because people could figure out who's using ChatGPT for what. But there is value in there, and it's all about the data sets. It's all about how the information is consumed. But yes, I do believe for education purposes, AI is a wonderful thing, and I'm looking at it from the positive, not the negative. But deep fakes. If you know anyone or had any relatives who were asked for ransom money because someone thought or got caught by that, it's not fun. And there's a lot of things. I think one of the biggest things the telecom industry is missing, in fact, the world's missing, is trust. And AI and other types of technologies in communications, you'd want to be able to trust that the person calling you is real. And someone's voice is that authentication, right? It's usually you go by that voice. And when you can't trust that person's voice, you can't trust the person's image, and you have deep fakes without any easy way to validate or verify, we got trouble. And so... But I don't believe in leading with fear, greed, and disruption in terms of why we should regulate. But it's maybe why we should innovate and find good ways to solve that, so we can bring the good forward. Well,
Eli, this is for you. I know that Replicant has been working in this for a long time, and you guys are very interesting. Like, you have your own models and your own way you do stuff. In your experience when you're building it, how have you tailored what you're doing to accommodate clients like AAA who obviously have very specific requirements? Or
So we have a lot of guardrails in the system. Corporate customers, large use cases, they like the idea of ChatGPT and these AI models, and they look cool to them, but they don't want to put that on the phone. They don't want to put that in front of customers. Certainly not in front of customers that are on the side of the road trying to get a tow truck. Certainly not for serious things. They want guardrails, and they want what the AI says to the person to be constrained and to be scripted and to follow the kind of the corporate pattern. So we put a lot of guardrails around it. It's actually quite hard to do. We do some generative AI to actually power the model and the understanding of what happens in the conversation, but a lot of it has to be kind of custom made and tailored to be very, very careful around what's said to the person, and that you're not saying something outside of the policy, not saying something that could be offensive, not saying something that could be dangerous. So it definitely takes a lot of work. We certainly know how AI can be dangerous. Your example, Kristian, was fantastic. It's definitely scary. But at the same time, at the same time, you know, it's already out there, right? People already have it. The cat's out of the bag on this one. People can read the paper and how it was done. The GPT papers is out there. They don't have the training data necessarily, but now there's Llama 2. So this is already out there. So for regulation, we have to be very careful. The regulatory market is very complex. There's lobbyists. There's a lot of ways to influence it with money. It's very hard for them to do, quote unquote, the right thing. It's much easier for them to do what's convenient and what ends up happening and what the political will kind of pushes forward. It's rarely what's in our best interest. So I would be very cautious about any kind of regulation in this space. There's also an AI arms race that's happening now, and every country, every government, every military wants to get their hands on this. Something that's truly able to make decisions, something that has agency and is able to make good decisions with large amounts of information and data. It's now starting to be more powerful than what a human can do. Depending on how the hallucinations work out, it could be very powerful on the battlefield as well. So we have to be very careful with losing that AI arms race ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big problem at the moment is it's moving so fast. So, you know, regulation tends to move slowly. So you have the writers and actors strike going on at the moment, and that's a lot to do with if a Hollywood studio says, can we scan you and can we read all of your data and can we, you know, copy your voice and copy your movements and everything? Who owns that? Can I say, well, in your next movie, it's a condition of your next movie that you give that all to me and I never have to hire you again? So you've got, you know, the problem at the moment is regulation and science fiction have basically intersected. You've got to sort of regulate these imaginary things that should be in a science fiction movie, and actually we're watching them appear, you know, in real time.
Yeah, I think I go along with Jeff when I'm positive about AI on one side. On the other side, I see some tentative to put barriers, restrict, evaluate the risk, which is up to some extent right, but we need to be aware that we can use AI, and we better use AI also to mitigate the risk. Okay, so I'm thinking to use the AI to positive things like decrease the bias, decrease the discrimination. The risk I see is with regulation that only big vendors could access something, and this is very risky, of course. We are in an open source community here. And we are also very used to have and to deal with the voice media, and voice is unique to us, which is, of course, raising a lot of ethical issues in the voice is mine, it's an authentication method, and so on and so forth. But again, I think the challenge is to move from a pure risk vision also to use the AI to do good things. And just like, I don't know, antivirus can use AI to do good things, why not using AI to help in decreasing bias and so on and so forth?
James, did you have something else? Yeah. Sorry, Kristian, go ahead.
So, I think I heard arms race, and in that context, it was referring to foreign governments, right, and potential political, economic influence, military, et cetera. I think another interesting area where the term arms race applies in AI is you look at like deepfakes, for example. So several years ago, I started working on a media authentication platform to authenticate media at the time of production and associate it with the original creator. Because I had seen already then that we kind of have this like cat and mouse game escalating arms race of like generative model, detection model, generative model, detection model. And I mean, who knows how it's really going to shake out, but I tend to think that the generative models are eventually going to win. And then even then, like when, if all these things ever do is return probability, and it's never 100%. So when you're talking about influencing an election or ruining somebody's life, I don't know how much value or utility there's going to come from, the sort of detection good guy side of this escalating race here.
And I'll just say, take it all away and say the same thing about Twitter and real humans, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is something that came up with Jeff. I think we're going to talk about the same thing here. This was one of the reasons why the sort of the Web3 blockchain identity stuff it is a big topic, because the idea of authenticity and guaranteeability of identity is still an unsolved problem.
It's still being authentic and proving it is definitely key. Also, as James was referring to, intellectual property ownership and respect for it. I mean, I have friends in Hollywood who are working on different projects, and they're both on the studios, a lot on the studio side. And to James's point, if you are an actor and actress and you want royalties, right? What do you own, right? You own your likeness. Now, some people will say you signed that away based on a contract you signed, but I have a startup, or maybe don't have a startup, but I was working with a person who's very famous in the music industry about creating a new record label where we license with permission famous people's voices to be used with permission, where they opt in to be on a song, so that if you're going to write a song, someone could sing it if they want to. But it was meant to be a way to verify the deep fakes. So if you see The Weeknd and Drake singing a song, we at least know whether or not they opted in, or at least we have permission for it. And because I do think, right, that if you think about how the technology could change everything, imagine everyone in this room when they were 5 years old, 15 years old, 50 years old were scanned, right, for your family, so that they have a model of you in the future where you will exist forever because you've left behind digital breadcrumbs anyway. And now they have different ways to know you, to measure you, and to get to know you. You can actually be remembered differently. And if you're an actor who happens to be fortunately famous, so many things, if you want to license your voice, license your likeness to your legacy for your future estate, you can do that. So we were thinking about protecting some people's voices for their future estates, for future royalties, but it comes with also where we're at. And so I happen to believe that if we allow the good, great science fiction can still happen. I grew up on Space Odyssey 2001 and What Happened to Hal, and that's one scenario. There's the other scenarios that we find life, that we use these technologies to cure cancer, that we actually find ways to find peace in a world where we otherwise have no peace.
More of the future of like the culture and that kind of thing.
Influencing culture, but short term, again, the lobbyists are super powerful. And people are not thinking beyond their nose. And so I am worried that some of these technologies will get shut out of because we don't have billions of dollars to lobby at the same level. And the people in Washington are not always thinking about the consumers. They're thinking about the votes. And they're thinking about what keeps them in power. So it's a real concern.
I think this is a little while down the road, maybe like 10 years. Some of these... We're thinking right now about everyone copying us because we're kind of arrogant as humans and stuff, but give it time and it might be a fully, completely automated, made-up likeness and voice that's not anyone that actually existed, that is just as cool and popular.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go to the end game, right, we're in the process of building a new species at the moment, right? Right, and
I like where this is going. Yes,
you can see people wanting to marry AIs, right? You can see someone turning off an AI without permission and being charged for murder. You can see AI rights becoming a significant thing, right? And this is all super science fiction, but I don't think it's more than 10 years out in the horizon. So what I was saying about science fiction, I wasn't doing the kind of Terminator, we're all going to be killed by cyborgs, which is all, sounds fun. But I mean this more kind of slightly weird stuff, because in a few years' time, there will be a few androids in our audience, and they will have consciousnesses. Will they? What validates them as having rights? A whole area of ethical discussion, which will make like stealing my image and sticking it on the internet seem minor in comparison.
I think what we're going to see actually very soon is. We have favorite Netflix shows, right? You really get into it, you like the characters, you love the storyline, boom, it's canceled, it's gone. But you want more episodes, right? So there will be new episodes, AI-generated episodes, eventually shows that are entirely AI-generated. And the characters you're being attached to are actually completely generated from AI. So there's the likeness of humans that we want to preserve now, and that might be a mentality for today.
It's happening now, at least for one project I am aware of, that's exactly what's happening. It turns out that the best skill to have as an engineer in 2023 is to write a simple sentence in English that's understood. I never expected that. And
English teachers everywhere are thrilled right now to hear that.
But it's right, as long as you're communicating with the LLM in a way that it's understood and your prompts are sharp, you can get amazing results. And so to Netflix specifically, it's actually a very interesting conversation we'll have offline, but it's literally happening, and it's not subject only to Netflix, but it's the idea though of taking a genre, taking a storyline and extending it without the writers.
Well, an interesting aspect of that, living in Hollywood, one of the things that they're talking about a lot is that people who are talented and can write well can basically be a force multiplier, right? They can do a lot more. So what it does is actually also crater sort of the class of rising talent, people who don't have much space in an industry like television or movies. And then if that's replaced by these tools, how do they get that experience? How do they get up again? So that's what some of the lot of Strike is about as well.
That's actually what we're seeing deploying Autopilot and Copilot for using GPT for programming. And initially I saw it, and it wrote amazing code. Bug-free, wrote the unit tests too, and I was like, oh no, am I out of a job here? But what we found actually is that you don't have now product managers just telling the AI, go write me some code. You still have engineers, but there's a force multiplier there. And now I'm able to get a lot more code done. In fact, I kind of stepped away from day-to-day code writing for a while, and now I just came back to it. Now it's actually a lot of fun. Implementing a specific silly little algorithm to manipulate strings is not all that fun, but being able to compose a large complex system is. So it's unlocking some things for us. And I think as long as there's a use for what we want to create, there's a lot of potential there.
I think the Netflix description. So Netflix has very clearly just decided to go with quantity over quality, just obviously, right? And I'll be the first to admit it. I've gotten sucked into some just absolute Netflix trash TV, and you look at it's some fresh-faced 22-year-old or whatever whatever the characters and the cast is, and it's like. I don't have an emotional attachment to them like I would Leonardo DiCaprio or something because I saw Titanic 5 times in the movie theater in 1997 or whatever, right? So it's kind of are they real and do I care? And then you start getting into social media, et cetera, where things are so heavily augmented and edited and face-tuned and who knows whatever else. At least for when I get to the point where, like, what's really the difference? And it can come down to music and et cetera. So I think there's maybe a decent chance that there's a forthcoming entire generation that grows up not having any sort of like maybe somewhat parasynthetic relationship with these actual human being celebrities because they just don't care. It's an avatar. It's some human looking character on the screen that has some identifier. And that's it.
Yeah, one thing you can count on is that technology you look at any moment in 10 years will seem silly. And we've witnessed, well, we've had modems. Remember modems waiting to go online and like 10 characters streaming on it, and you know, we can't live with that anymore. Computers with giant monitors that were so heavy you couldn't even lift them, and now we have like all these iPads and everything, and so you have like the state of like anything you can think of, your TV set, and you look back at it and you just laugh at how silly it was before, and you're looking at this stuff we're talking about is only a couple years old. So like, and the pace that it's accelerating is similar to that of like, remember when there was no Google one day and there's no Amazon, and then you're just like, oh, wait, what's this? And it's there, and now you can order stuff and robots bring you stuff, and like, so I think important thing is to anticipate that you can't apply whatever it is like right now to any problem because it already got better while we were having this conversation. It's going at such a pace. And it might top out for a while and then flatline for a while, but it doesn't seem to be yet. And so we have to also anticipate, what are we going to be able to do in 2 years from now? We should just act like it already exists instead of waiting for it to exist to build on top of it. So that's kind of my motivator anyway.
And I think, Tony, you make up a good point too. That you mentioned that these are, you know, there's communication here as well. Like there's real-time communication with these systems, and that's something that is unique and specific even to everyone here as well, right? The idea that you need to be able to communicate with these virtual people. And Kristian, like you were saying, they might be avatars. Kids might not care who they are, but they still want to interact with them, and they want to interact with them in real time. And that's not today what is easily achievable. And some stuff I know you've been working on, Tony, to make that a quicker thing. And what are the constraints right now, or what are the interesting parts about that communications part of how people are going to want to communicate with AI? What is the barrier there? How fast does it have to be? What sort of things can we expect from the real-time aspect of this?
Well, you know, I think, so connection is a universal human quality throughout all of history, every single culture, everywhere. I think what's going to be interesting here is, you know, how many humans, if any, are in some of these interactions, right?
I also think that it really depends on the context, on the industry, because, I mean, if I want to interact just to play, or I can accept some creativity, okay, I can use a generative AI avatar or a virtual agents like that, and I can be very much creative, and I can accept that. But if I want to use that, I don't know, for military purpose or something like that, I cannot be that creative. Yeah. So that depends really on the kind of context.
You don't want your bank to be that creative.
Yeah.
So AIs are going to generate a whole ton of capital. You know, if you look, we have three things that are valuable really in life, right? One is things we own, stuff, you know, resources. Second is intellectual property that allows us to manipulate that stuff. And the third one is basically celebrity or our reputation. And that's really what we trade on. We're about to create tens of millions of new celebrities or entities that have this property that you can interact with them and trust them and you know, like them and empathize with them and so on. You know, again, that's why the actors in Hollywood are so concerned, because suddenly the whole new species of entities are going to turn up.
Sometimes even normal real people are already might as well be AI, right? Like when we're probably acting slightly different right now than we normally would because we're talking to a bunch of people. If you go to the store and somebody sells you a pack of gum, or to check out at the gas station, they're going through the same mundane thing they say 1,000 times, and they're not. You wouldn't know who they were from talking to them because they're almost acting at that point. Or like if you're on the phone with the receptionist that you call, they are forced to say exactly the right thing or they'll get in trouble. So they're so sick of it after the 1,000th time, they're not even listening to themselves anymore. So it's kind of like, that's one of the places I feel like it's already overlapping. The only thing that the AI can't do is persist. You know, I feel like that'll be one of the next things, right? Like right now it's born and dies in 10 seconds. As it comes to life, says one sentence and dies again. And you have to remind it, like 50 First Dates movie, like its whole, what's gone on so far, and it wakes back up and like says one thing and dies again. So like pretty soon, the next thing will be obviously like well, we have only so much input and output we can give to it, so we're going to need it to persist somehow. And you can kind of get away with it. Like we have some tricks. We have some features where you can summarize the conversation into a smaller paragraph, so it bootstraps it next time you talk to it. And I remember yesterday we were talking about your bug, But like beyond that, like soon it'll be able to probably use that ability to generate code to help make itself, because you can already ask the AI what are you made out of, and it'll start telling you all the details. So you can be like, could you look at your own code and make it a little better, and maybe that Skynet starts happening a little sooner than we thought.
What we're seeing on the real-time side is latency is really important. How quickly you respond to someone on the phone is very important. When people have a normal conversation, they expect a quick response. So getting a fast response out there is absolutely critical. So we look to SignalWire for that, of course.
And I think one of the best things about that is, we're all here because ClueCon is a kind of a communications telephony, real-time communications oriented conference, and we know from dealing with humans with voice what happens when you have extremely high latency. Something like the talking over, a lot of the frustration that gets introduced. So I think with our backgrounds in this, in dealing with people and people, that we're in a unique position to bring some of that expertise to some of the real-time natures of AI.
In 2011, I had a startup called 3 Rings. Why 3 Rings? Because after the 3rd ring, call goes to voicemail. And we were looking to use AI at that point with social media as a way to increase revenue for phone companies, because as you know, if call goes to voicemail, not so much revenue. But if you can actually get people to talk, there's money being made. And so we were just early, but the idea was to look at the relationship between the calling party, between the person originating the call and the other side, and see, so the first time it goes ring no answer, so nothing, but it triggered an AI query to search the internet between these two people. Are these numbers related? What are their names? What's the social media? And the example I used to use is that I, at the time, was very active on Facebook, and I had 2 phones. I had a US phone and an Israeli phone, and I just traveled to Tel Aviv, and so we actually had an ability at that point to terminate calls into Facebook. So the idea was if you were trying to reach me and you didn't have my Israeli number, but the AI figured out that I was in Israel, and the next time you tried to call me, your call got diverted to the Facebook plugin. That would make you happy because we get to communicate, makes the carrier happy because they get to charge for minutes. And we ended up pivoting into a different company at the time, but I do think that if conversational AI matters, and if for that matter, if we move away from buying things in buckets and going back to charging per minute for certain high quality calls, because if you and I are trying to close a deal, it's a $25 million deal, but I need you on the phone, I'll pay a lot of money to terminate it to get you, right? Leaving you a voicemail doesn't help if I really need you to speak to you. And so I think that if we could somehow shift the model away from being per bucket and go back to per minute for certain premium services, we can use AI to our advantage to create high revenue, high value services, which right now we don't even consider, because I think the timing is right and there's enough data out there that we can now do these large data model constructions and solve that problem. And I think that it's not game over. I think this game is beginning. And yes, I do. I recently gave a talk at Oxford, and I was scared out of my mind. I spoke in front of 800 students, college students at Oxford, and after my talk, most of the kids saw no value of a mobile service provider, which really bothered me. They thought that all they needed was an app to talk. They didn't understand that carriers or others brought that to them. And so I got really worried that Gen Y, when they're ready to pay their bills, won't be buying mobile services. And I worry for everyone in this room that we should not take ourselves for granted, that we need to reinvent the services we're offering and use AI to our advantage to figure out what those services should be.
When we were talking about latency, that's something that I've been hyper-focused on. And actually, the more I've been doing this, the more I start comparing actual interactions to the kind with the bots that we're building, and how I find myself choosing my words more carefully, even with other humans, because I'm so used to trying to explain stuff to the AI model. But I also noticed that like the actual humans have the same bugs that some of the programs we're writing are. They will not listen to you and start talking before you're done, or they don't know when you stop talking, so they have a hard time like responding, or it's an awkward pause, like because you're looking at each other, like is it your turn to talk or me, like am I done yet? And like some of those things are, you know, we're trying to figure out how to do. We kind of made like we have a barge feature. You know, all phone systems have a barge, you talk and then it cuts off, and so it doesn't keep saying it's greeting or whatever, but most of them are made from sound, but we made it actually recognize words. So like it only will stop if it sees that you actually said something meaningful. Like instead of if you just cough or something, it doesn't stop. But if you say like stop it, it will. And that like working on that is I found it very interesting that that latency problem isn't limited to my program. It's like actual every human on Earth. It's like one of the most inefficient ways to communicate ever is to like talk to people. The information could just beam before you into your brains. It'd be so much better, but of course we don't have that yet. But it's fun. Like trying to simulate that, I actually feel encouraged because I think sometimes our robot is easier to talk to than people now. Mm-hmm. At least in my experience. Not everyone in the world, but you know, yeah, you especially.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to open up the floor here too to see if anyone has any questions for the panel. Anything they might want to ask to see if, you know, you have a lot of folks up here. Hey, Brian, you have one, and we have another one over here. I don't think there's a floating mic around, so. Oh, there is.
I want to bring up copyright. People are talking about copyright works that these language models are trained on, and how that some are lobbying to have the copyright laws changed.
Great. So the question was on copyright and how this is specifically for code generation or just in general text in general? So general, all copyright and how a lot of the things that this is trained on are all copywritten, and it can generate copywritten works, both code and otherwise. So, you know, the question is how do we think that copyright might have to change to accommodate this, or does the models themselves have to change?
There's if you're, you know, I'm sure some of us are, and you as well, there's actually a fairly recent court case surrounding this. The comedian Sarah Silverman and somebody else is essentially suing OpenAI because it essentially clearly reproduces their work in whole. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that progresses through the courts and what the ultimate ruling is there.
Content of their work isn't even in the model. The probability is there, but the actual content itself is not in them. Maybe it is.
Is it?
That sounds like the lawyer's argument, and that sounds a very good one. We didn't actually didn't actually copy your material. It's just a sort of feeling of having read it once in the past, which is obviously what we all do. We read it and you know, and then write new poetry or new jokes based on sort of having experienced it at one point.
It's like a little what you were saying earlier too, Jeff, about the idea of authenticity and like plagiarism. People can have the same joke, but also frequently I heard it somewhere and then recite it.
You will most likely find other countries passing laws that answer that question way before the United States. And that, you know, in the U.S. we are being reactive, not proactive with anything. So I don't believe, you know, that we're going to see anything in our lifetime that's meaningful here.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Do you think this might change, if this were to change copyright law in such a way where only big corporations have access to generative AI? Would you consider that bad?
Yes.
Great. This question over here. Yes, sir.
Kind of similar topic with AI being trained on things that already exist and then using that to generate something new. How do you differentiate between that and something that is actually new, if there is something?
So this was the sort of the Penrose question, right? Which is there a difference between the way we think and machines think, and can you actually, you know, create a bright line and say, you know, humans can invent and machines cannot invent. Humans can solve mathematical problems and come up with new theorems, and machines cannot. They can only do that with which they've already experienced. And that's a very fun, and it consumed at least 5 years of my life, so I can talk for some time on it, but that's the question.
I think there's another case here where certainly within like music and media, this has been something that's been hotly contested and debated for ever since anything started getting recorded or created. So there was another case several years ago at this point. It was the Gaye family estate, Marvin Gaye, versus Pharrell Williams from the Neptunes and Robin Thicke, who had created this song. And it's like you listen to Marvin Gaye, Got to Give It Up, and you listen to Blurred Lines, and it's dicey, let's just say. So the Gaye family estate ended up winning that, and it was a kind of a pivotal moment in terms of trying to better sort of define, like outright lifted versus inspired by, and that case significantly tightened the reins on essentially what constituted copyright infringement.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
First and foremost, thanks for the erudite discussion. Appreciate it. You mentioned like the billion-dollar companies that have lobbyists that are self-serving. FreeSwitch started as an open source community, and then FreeSwitch Advantage came along to kind of further that, and SignalWire to further that as well. Are there like grassroots organizations like open source communities that are now trying to engage with U.S. lawmakers to promote the good AI and bring up the good aspects of AI? Are those communities coalescing? If you have any ideas about what those communities are, would you like to provide some examples? And where can we go to support those type of movements?
I'm not aware of anyone who speaks on behalf of the people. I don't look at Zuck or anyone else to represent the people. And so, no. That's not to say you shouldn't go to Washington and see your representatives or go on the Hill and call on that. In 1996, I created the Voice on the Net, or VON Coalition, because when I launched Free World Dial-Up originally, I thought it was fun to offer free phone calling around the world and encourage other people to do the same. And then in March of 1996, 300 phone companies went to the FCC and asked for the sale and use of internet telephony software to be banned in America and the makers to be regulated as phone companies. And while I thought it was quite humorous, and I really did think it was humorous, I created I didn't think I was deserving to create a trade association, because I was working on Wall Street at the time. I did. And that association still exists today, crazy enough as it is. And we ended up doing a lot of great things for voice over IP. I have not seen such an organization exist on behalf of AI, even from a consumer perspective of just protecting the future. And if you would like to start that organization, you probably have 100 people, 200 people, 1 million people who say yes to support it, but those efforts need to happen. What I did discover, though, is if you show up inside the Beltway and speak up and you're an unknown entity, people will take notice. And you will get an audience with whomever you want, because they do want to hear you. And so it's just the difference between not caring and caring and being present. But I would love to believe that there are people who are speaking up on behalf of everyone else.
Bravo. It's inspiring stuff. I mean, the story of getting in there, I think it's something that we can all take to heart, right? To make sure that, the voices of the people are heard. You made it happen. We've seen it happen otherwise, right? It doesn't just have to be the companies that drive it. It can be open source things, right?
I mean, yeah, so in 96, it was the first time, I think, in U.S. in lobbying history for this trade association to rise from the ether. And I had no idea that it was even a thing, right? Because I just didn't have a background in politics. And we turned out, in retrospect, we changed a lot of people's thoughts about what was possible. And they had just never heard of such a thing, of just organizing on the internet and being present. In 2000 and 2001, I hosted the first ever internet freedom rallies on the steps of the US Capitol, because I was worried about legislation that was going through Congress that would harm commerce in the United States. And again, no one else did it, so we did it. I just haven't been in the mood to go to Washington, but I would strongly encourage other people. I mean, there's a lot of work that can be done. And it's really the large companies get the attention because they can afford to. But what they can't do, and the congressional hearings are always looking for, is the consumers who are hurt. There always is going to be someone on the committee that would love to give a microphone to someone whose businesses were hurt, someone who was misunderstood, just to have that voice heard, because it helps provide balance. And so the missing loud voice is the fact that we're not there. And by the way, one of the other issues with AI in Hollywood, and for that matter music, is the royalties for streaming. Because the industries have been shifting away from making dollars per vinyl to fractions of pennies for streaming music. And unfortunately, for actors and even for studios, the same thing's happening on the internet for streaming media. And those rights have to be really rethought, you know. And so whether it's mechanical royalty or performing royalty or other types of royalties, you know, the internet did not exist when those royalties were first conceived. And part of the issues and part of the reason people are striking is to get what's due to them. And part of that, what's due, is a rethink. And I'm hopeful that that can happen, because that would change the game immediately.
Well, I think everyone in the room has valued and gotten value out of open source initiatives that use VoIP technology. Right? We're here for a voice conference, a real-time conference. FreeSwitch is built on, you know, from Tony's hard work and everyone else in the industry, and also on top of all the things we've all done, all the projects that are out there, we all benefit from all the time. So thank you all for being up here again. I think we'll call it there. Use this as an example to get out there. You know, for those of you who are also watching the internet or who watch this later, remember, you don't just have to be here. You can be out there, be from anywhere. Go have your voices heard. We're all impacted by all of this in the future. Exciting times. Things are changing quickly. Thank you all for coming up here. Really appreciate it. Yeah.